So our first panelist who's going to speak is Katherine Richardson. Katherine needs very little introduction, I think. She's well known both in the science world, but she made a great leap of faith when the Copenhagen city actually hosted the COP15. And she, I think, came out of that as one of the spokespeople for science. But she then carried on talking to policymakers, which was very brave of her. And she led, I think, a very innovative, perhaps unique in the world, commission on climate change, just to demonstrate how a country could take the issue of becoming not addicted to fossil fuel by the year 2050. Now, I know she's not going to speak entirely about that, but I do think a lot of people want to hear just a bit of that story as well, Katherine. So, Katherine Richardson, please.
Thank you very much, Jackie, but I'd like to start by saying congratulations to IIASA, and thank you for having me here. I have to say, with this focus on 40 years, I was watching Jeff Sachs here and thinking it was 40 years ago last month, and he and I started in the same college class. And both of us would like to think we've aged very well, but quite honestly, I think IIASA's aged better. Now, this session is all about global transformations and understanding the world we live in. And as Jackie suggested, my actual reason for being here, or the ticket that I got here on, is the fact that I was chair of the commission that came up with a plan for how Denmark can be independent of fossil fuels by 2050. As far as I know, it's the only country in the world that has actually set a date when they say they want to be free of fossil fuels. This isn't just a pipe dream out at 2050 that doesn't affect the politicians of today. There are also short-term goals. For example, 50% of our electricity coming from wind by 2020. 192 out of 197 members of parliament voted for this plan, and that has really important implications for infrastructure investment, not least of which from the private sector, because believe me, nobody is investing in coal infrastructure any longer in Denmark. What I think is important here is actually having the vision. A lot of people come to me when they hear about it and they say, oh, you'll never make it. And my answer is, well, I don't know, and neither do you. And maybe we won't, but I guarantee you we'll be a whole lot closer in 2050 than you will be if you're not even trying to get there. So while this is a very ambitious goal and worth talking about, we might get back to it in the discussions or the questions, I really want to move away from that because, to be perfectly honest, it has nothing to do with a global transformation. And I think because of our short lifetimes, apropos Jeff and me, but because of our short lifetimes and the focus on the here and now, we worry an awful lot about how we're going to get from today to tomorrow. I think most of the discussion we had before the coffee break really focused on that. And sometimes I think that means that we can't see the transformation, the real transformation. We can't see the forest for the trees. And I believe that and we were focusing this a little bit this morning on, is it science's fault? Is it business's fault? Is it the politician's fault? And I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think we fail to take a step back and see where are we and what's really happening to us. I think the real transformation we're talking about started about 150 years ago, and it's actually moving not from hunter-gatherers in the technical sense that Naki was in a little while ago, but the sort of perception of humans and the relationship to the planet from the hunter-gatherer era to going to the future, to living within planetary boundaries, what I would call planetary stewardship. And planetary boundaries, I took that out as an example of this kind of a vision for stewardship. There can be many more. I was an author on the planetary boundaries work, but obviously that's why I want to advertise it, but I'm not saying it's the only vision or the only way we can go. But I think it's important because it acknowledges there are limits to how much of the Earth system we humans can assume for our own purposes. The hunter-gatherer way of approaching nature and humans assumes that the resources and services that we depend upon are large compared to our demands. The planetary boundaries, or whatever you want to call it, acknowledges that these resources are not unlimited. Now, this would seem obvious for most of us, and you know, when I think of that picture, the most downloaded picture, I think it's the one in the middle of this picture actually, from the web of the globe, You know, I would think that anybody, I assume everybody's seen that many times. Why is it so difficult to get people to acknowledge there are limits to how much we can use? And yet that was one of the big issues in Rio. They didn't want to write there are limits to how far we can go. If we admit that the sky's not the limit, then we lose the American dream. But this transition, as I say, has been going on, I think, for about 150 years, or at least 150 years, and I think that science is very important in catalyzing the transition. I think actually Darwin was really important. Darwin came along. Until then, the church had been telling us that humans are placed above nature. Our job is to bring civilization to nature. We can use nature for our needs. Darwin comes along and says, oh, no, 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 no. We're not above nature. We're a part of nature. We're a species like all others. Naki referred to slavery. What happens when a scientist comes into the picture and says, those aren't animals you're selling, they're your brothers? Not many people make the link between Darwin and slavery, but I think there is one. Many of the apparent conflicts that we see in society, and not least of which some of the conflicts that were being discussed before the coffee break, actually can be boiled down to how these differences in how society perceives the relationship between us humans and the Earth system. The Greens versus the finance minister, the liberals versus the conservatives, the Democrats versus the Republicans. But where have we gotten to since Darwin? Where has science brought us? Well, most of us, unless maybe we live in Kansas, have accepted the fact that we belong to a species. But the combined activity of that species can be enough to influence how the whole world works, the entire Earth system. That's just as difficult for society of our day to swallow as Darwin's ideas were in 1859. I think we are moving in the right direction, and I think the part of society that accepts that humans are a part of nature and that there are limits to how much we can extract out of the Earth system is growing. Will the transformation be completed? I don't know. If it is to be completed, when will that happen? I don't know, but it won't be tomorrow. I do know, however, that Earth system science tells us that completion of this global transformation is a prerequisite for the continued development of human societies. And I believe the analytical framework that was being sought after in this morning's discussion is actually the vision. And here I disagree very much with Professor Fedorov, who said, oh, we'll never manage the planet. I believe the vision has to be active management and stewardship of the biosphere and the Earth system in order to keep the human demand for these resources within the supply of the resources. Thank you.